returning to the good old days of the 90s where the Cold War came to an end, leaving the United States as the uncontested superpower. A soon-to-be hangman decided to recuperate his losses by invading a neighboring state, and Japan's economy nobody thought would ever stun suddenly,
depending on whom we're asking,
blew up, beginning the trend of hikikomoris and a rapid birth decline. But out of such ruckus was a piece of media that was able to see beyond the present and accurately depict shut-in needs, internet trolls, and the need for a supreme being to oversee the safety of the online space. And my goodness, was it spectacular! Now, if you're well aware of my fondness for the titular Hyper Agent, the respective releases regarding Gridman have mostly been carried out by a particular company, in which they have released banger after banger with the occasional stinkers. But the manufacturer that is responsible for the Ultraman kits wouldn't just idly stand by and decide to recreate their own iteration of Gridman, in which, rather than re-releasing another version of the 21st century redesign, Bandai instead went old school and decided to release the OG design that started it all. When closely observing the head, it is obvious that the 90s vibe is prevalent, in which the stormtrooper-sized head allows for the suit actor to wear the helmet and conduct the complex tokusatsu action depicted in the TV show. This is not mentioning the Ultraman-inspired energy bulb at the center that is more or less there to act as a battery alert warning. If only Gridman could connect via USB-C. And let's not forget the 90s lightbulb-filled eyes, similar to those seen on Kiryu, in which not only act to provide enhanced visual aid to Gridman so that he can lock onto targets, but also to lighten the mood. Just be aware that these are the short-lived bulbs from the 90s, and not LEDs, so longevity is more or less thrown out the window. Moving down to the body, it's more or less simple as it gets, compared to the modern day iteration, in which the shiny metallic armor with the tints of blue covered the more or less red uniform. Wait, red uniform? Which allows the suit actor to perform the highly coordinated stunts as seen in the show. But for fans who enter the franchise through the anime, where the titular center pentagon is present in the original suit and it's more or less identical with the red outline and the yellow center within, but it's in the back where the details shine, as contrary to the simplistic chest, the back is decorated with the extra details that can only be seen in high quality monster arts, as there is a little metallic backpack with the various exhaust gratings on both the bottom and sides, probably where the modern iteration got its influence from. This is not mentioning the inverted arrow and 3 rectangular shapes that add to Gridman's uniqueness and thus be a staple in future designs. But unlike Figma's rendition of Gridman where the country of origin is nowhere to be seen on the figure, Bandai seems to have missed the memo, as it is evidently shown on the lower back that breaks out any sort of authenticity in the figure and further reinforces the fact that this iteration of Gridman is a communist. Look at the shoulders. Typical of your tokusatsu hero, Gridman is covered with a pair of some extra thick shoulder armor that, while it doesn't really provide any sort of protection to our titular Hyper Agent, does aid in its cool factor, as the extra mass can act as psychological warfare to opposing kaijus, if they're dumb enough, as the moment Gridman is faced with either the Big G or an illegal alien, he's more or less a dead man. And no, the Independence Day tactic of uploading a virus won't have any effect on this alien. Moving down to the arms, let's be honest, they're the stubby Asian proportions as it gets, that while screen accurate limits the reach that Gridman can engage in his targets. And if you want to be more shocked, they're shorter than those seen on the Big G, which is saying a lot. But the wrist armor on the lower arm is colorful, with the left wrist possessing Gridman's iconic Hyper Beam. And looking at Gridman's ranged weaponry, the patterns are more or less identical to those seen on the torso, with the only metallic silver being ousted for a bronze paint job, allowing our beloved hero to engage melee-oriented foes from a safe distance. Moving below the belt, Gridman, rather than being accused of sexual harassment like a bitch, Gridman, like the Sigma male he is, has no need for underwear and instead tries to show off his missile.
Missile in the air! Missile in the air!
As portrayed through the black armor located where his
Missile
is.
But let's be honest, he's more or less in the same position as Okarun.
What?
But just like the torso, it's the back where it shines, as Gridman has
Great ass!
a skin-tight suit highlights each individual crevice of the human physique that not only makes this figure a work of art that can find satisfaction in, but it's so detailed that the figure can be used as the model blueprint for peak human research.
That is America's ass.
Moving beyond my personal fetishes,
The legs are also a hefty asset that Gridman has in his arsenal, as not only are they that puts anime waifus to shame, but also that the leg armor with its white and yellow aesthetic adds an extra layer of the space age drip and aids in turning the already thick legs into a pair of lethal assets capable of stomping, kicking, and knee kicking hostile kaijus in melee combat. The act to compensate for Gridman's short and stubby arms, but also rival the likes of even the king of the monsters himself.
now, if you've been following this channel,
When it comes to accessories, especially kaiju figures, Bandai happen to have a few bolts and screws loose in their head, as they happen to be gracious if you're sponsored by Kadokawa, or straight out lazy if your sponsor was Toho. But with the titular Hyper Agent being able to supervise any worldwide whip he desires,
or for you casuals out there,
sabotage Bandai's corporate image, Bandai did the right move and locked and loaded Gridman with the US military's daily arsenal. As the melee-oriented combatant Gridman is, the titular Hyper Agent is accommodated with a buttload of hands. Besides the out-of-the-box fists for punching hostiles, there are these holding hands to hold a melee weapon down the line, karate chopping hands to neck-slice kaijus with relatively long necks, these direction hands when Gridman acts in guiding little children like the hero he is, grabbing hands to depict what actually goes on behind the camera, these pointing hands for some extra behind the scenes moments,
Come.
open hands when Gridman's blocking an incoming blow, and the alternative holding hands to wield the other melee weapon.
speaking of melee weapons,
When Gridman is thrust into situations where his martial arts aren't enough, Gridman goes full medieval as he uses this sword which acts to inflict light slashes to opposing kaijus, and Bandai seems to have properly invested in the titular weapon as the metallic silver is beautifully applied alongside the handle, even with various ornaments being added with the shiny paint job without any paint blotches. But even with a sword, there are occasions when Gridman is required to either block or parry incoming attacks, in which this shield is also accompanied with Gridman. And taking a close look at the shield, just like the sword, is beautifully rendered, in which the red shield is accompanied by the white outline alongside the emerald at the center. And that's not all, as the underside is colored in gray with the blue markings, not to mention the handle, that all add up to form a defensive weapon that can protect Gridman when he's either at range or up close and personal. But if Gridman needs some extra force with his physical blows, by detaching the white center, flip it over, attach the shield paws together, replace the handle with this longer alternative one, and attach the spike on top, you have this miniature axe that, while proportionally a nightmare to wield, allows Gridman to reenact as a horror movie monster and terrorize unsuspecting teenagers, unless they're armed and ready, in which But when Gridman is brought to the brink and is left with no other choice, the plasma blade and barrier shield can be combined to come and behold, form Gridman's iconic Grid lightsaber, a weapon so powerful that it infringed on copyright where it had to be changed to Gridman caliber in future iterations. And the lightsaber with its longer length and reach not only allows Gridman to strike hostile kaijus at a relatively safe distance, but with the increase in mass and sets more kinetic force to the threats that Gridman deems unsuitable, from illegal aliens, those that a refused birth control to those that go beyond the two predefined genders, making sure that with a grid lightsaber, Gridman is willing to
make
hyperspace
great again.
But when Gridman is brought face to face with a Lovecraftian entity that is fully capable of completely changing the genre,
For the sake of both you and me, it is preferred that Gridman engages in such targets from a safe distance.
and if you remember the wrist beam seen earlier, it is capable of firing Gridman's titular attack, the Grid Beam, and not with your imagination, as Bandai came prepared in which the Grid Beam effect piece can replicate the beam's likeness in plastic form,
In which you can place it on Gridman by
removing the wrist gun and inserting the effect piece in its place, in which you can replicate when Gridman is firing his iconic Grid Beam, and Bandai sure to give it their all in recreating the titular piece, as the shiny spark or recoil effect when the beam is fired is beautifully rendered. The shape of the beam is not only screen accurate but also massive, that puts Figma's iteration to shame, and the translucent nature of the plastic involved adds an extra shine factor when placed near a light source, making it the perfect choice of weaponry when Gridman is engaging in aerial targets or when he wants to keep his chastity intact. Now, if you're familiar with Figma's rendition of the modern day Gridman, he was a tall lad as he would tower over most humanoids and give the king of the monsters a run for his money. But the 90s were,
for better word,
a time where people were fed lesser quality meals, resulting in adults possessing relatively shorter statures to their modern day contemporaries.
and Gridman is no exception.
And look into OG Gridman, due to the short and stubby nature of the appendages, he's in the shorter range regarding the kaiju roster, as our titular Hyper Agent stands at a surprising 15 centimeters or 5.9 inches tall, making our
Baby man.
here susceptible prey to those of Alpha Titans. Here's the OG Gridman next to Gunpla, Figuarts, rival kaijus, and fellow Figma Gridman.
Now, if you're familiar with the Figuarts,
The line's reputation has constantly been in the air, as they could come out with a state-of-the-art range of posability that could even rival the likes of the Figma line, or be more or less similar to those of their American counterparts. And with Gridman being the extremely flexible fella that excels in acrobatic combat,
let's see if the Figuarts line does justice to our titular Hyper Agent.
the head can easily move up and down, side to side. The upper torso, while capable of some slight up and down movement, is more or less a statue, but the waist is slightly better with some front and back movement and a dynamic side to side movement. And even though Gridman here has a butterfly joint, movement due to the shoulder and chest armor is limited, but the shoulder armor can move up and down, and due to such movement, shoulder spread is relatively decent. Arm movement is good, but elbows can only bend up to 90 degrees. Decent hand movement, but even with that cake, Gridman puts most kaijus and humanoids to shame. Dynamic leg movement to accommodate his signature kick, but even with the double-sided joints, knees can only bend up to 90 degrees. Limited feet movement and a toe bend.
So regarding Gridman's range of posability,
While far below the standards left by Figma's modern interpretation and those seen in certain Figuarts, it's still more than capable of recreating the various poses as seen throughout the show, and far better than those seen on Bandai's human releases, making the titular Hyper Agent a force to be reckoned with, especially to opposing kaijus.
so what is there left to say?
Bandai's iteration of Gridman from the original TV series is an impressive release, as it retains all the traits that the Figuarts line strives to achieve, as portrayed through the detailed and immaculate sculpt, the organically applied paint job, the diverse range of posability, the swashbuckle of accessories that aid in recreating Gridman's likeness as shown in the series, and a screen-accurate likeness,
Making Gridman over here as if it was ripped straight out of the TV show and into my hands. But the figure isn't without its faults.
as there are certain points of articulation where the movement is limited, but considering Bandai's previous Figuarts and a certain other line,
It is a godsend.
and considering this figure's sturdiness and a thick
Key?
I prefer it over the Figma version.
With that out of the way,
Not only would I recommend the Figuarts Gridman to fans of the titular Hyper Agent, kaiju figures, or the tokusatsu genre overall, but also to any collectors of quality figures, especially those that admire that. In doing so, I'm gonna give the SH Figuarts reproduction of Gridman the Hyper Agent a ranking of an A+.